Hey guys, hoping all is well. So in this video we're going to be starting a new read-along series, and we're going to be continuing along with the Secret Zoo. This is the third book. This is the Secret Zoo, Riddles and Danger. So I know the Secret Zoo doesn't have a lot of pictures, but as always, please feel free to follow along. So this is the third book in the series, and we're going to see where the Action Scouts continue their adventure. So I'm going to start with the prelude, and then we'll jump into the story. Prelude. Tracks in the Grottoes. As Tank walked across the Clarksville Zoo, all was quiet and dark. A few stars speckled the otherwise black sky, and light fell in the shape of cones from scattered lampposts. The cold December wind had worked the warmth from his body. At Chinchilla Villa, a small stone building draped in ivy, he unlocked the door, then stepped inside, his palms rubbing together. An open exhibit, Chinchilla Villa had a terrain that was dry and rocky, covered with holes and crevices. Boulders lay around, and the prickly stems of cacti punched skyward. The facades of old country homes were built into the walls, creating the impression of a villa. The house had white walls, arched doorways, and colorful roof tiles made of clay. Brick sidewalks ran through patches of tall grass, connecting front doors. Dozens of chinchillas lay around, most of them sleeping. Tank strolled off the visitor path and took a seat in a wooden rocking chair on the porch of the house. He breathed warm air across his hands, cocked his head back, and began to rock. Beneath his massive weight, the chair creaked and groaned. He closed his eyes. A minute passed, then another. His breathing slowed, and his thoughts dimmed. Without meaning to, he dozed off. He awoke sometime later when he felt something tugging on the laces of his boots. He sat up with a jolt to see the porch covered with chinchillas, as many as 100. They'd come from a doorway in the wall that contained a hidden passage to the secret zoo, and now they were trying to climb his legs, the puny pads of their feet stroking his pants. Their whiskers and oversized ears twitching, their tiny grunts and barks filled the air. Something was wrong. The big man jumped to his feet, sending the chair into a wild rock that scattered dozens of chinchillas. "Easy, easy," Tank said. "What's wrong?" The animals turned all at once and flitted back through the door. Tank followed, careful not to flatten any beneath his size 22 boots. Once the last of the chinchillas had skittered past him, he eased the door shut, triggering on a few lights. Directly in front of him was a corridor leading into the ground. Lined with dusty bricks, it was barely large enough to fit him. He had entered the Grottoes, a magical staging area into the secret zoo and distant parts of the Clarksville Zoo. The chinchillas had led him down a steep ramp to where the tunnel leveled out. The Grottoes continued straight for at least 50 feet. On both sides of the passage were branches to new tunnels with dusty velvet curtains draped over their mouths. Above each opening was a thin metal plate engraved with the words, one read Metropolis, another read The Secret Chinchilla Villa, another read Alata Hippopotami. There were 8 tunnel branches in all. The chinchillas began to bark at a place in the ground. Tank dropped his gaze and saw the unmistakable prints of a Sasquatch in the dirt. Snowy and wet, they started at a tunnel marked The Secret Arctic Town. A chill ran through him. Though the Sasquatches were loose in the secret zoo, they never crossed its magical threshold to reach as far as the Grottoes. The big man ran forward, his broad shoulders nearly sweeping the walls, chinchillas dodging out of his path. He traced the tracks to where they disappeared through a bench marked the Knick-Knack and the Snack Shack. He followed the markings up a steep flight of stairs and pushed through an overhead hatch door, emerging inside a Clarksville Zoo gift shop. Muddy footprints revealed how the Sasquatch had roamed around before turning back to the Grottoes. Chinchillas flooded into a gift shop, filling it with the softer patter of their steps. They scampered in all directions, sniffing the ground and trampling across the footprints. The front wall of the Knick-Knack and Snack Shack was mostly glass. Tank stared out into a view along the eastern side of the zoo. He saw several outdoor exhibits, and, beyond them, the tall concrete wall that divided the property from the surrounding neighborhood. Trees were sparse, and in one of them Tank spotted Fort Scout, the elaborate tree fort that Noah and his friends played in. "What were you doing out here?" Tank said, as if he were talking to the Sasquatch. "Why didn't you—" He stopped short as the answer struck him. Without another thought, he turned and rushed down the steps, chinchillas scattering at his feet. He ran through the grottoes toward the secret zoo. He needed to get to Mr. Darby, the leader of the magical kingdom, and let him know what he'd just discovered. A Sasquatch had been scouting this Clarksville Zoo, looking for the best way to invade Noah's neighborhood. Chapter 1. Kangaroo Kampground. "Richie!" Ella called out. "Come on already!" Richie, who was bent down on one knee, finished tightening the laces on his running shoes, the kind he was noted for, a flashy pair with swirls of vibrant color, and hurried with his friends, the Action Scouts, who just stepped through the front entrance of the Clarksville Zoo. At the gates, Richie pitched his hip forward, plowed through a turnstile, and quickly caught up to Ella, Noah, and Megan. In being only 9:15 on a cold Saturday morning, the zoo was all but empty. The air was heavy and humid, and an overnight dusting of snow was beginning to melt, its wetness pasting dead leaves to their shoes. The four friends were dressed for the weather. Ella wore her usual earmuffs, fluffy pink things that resembled globs of cotton candy. Megan wore her spotty outdoor headband, which allowed her thick pigtails to droop down. Richie wore his stocking cap, his head circled by a bulky rift cup and crowned by a bushy pom-pom. And Noah wore his now favorite hunting cap, which Blizzard and Punchy, two animals from the secret zoo, had given him. Bright red with big ear flaps, it was every bit as goofy as Richie's hat, but it was warm, and Noah liked how it reminded him of his first journey into the magical world just beyond his backyard. The zoo was decked out for its festival of lights. Countless colorful bulbs dangled from eaves and coiled around fence rails. Even the trees and some outdoor exhibits were decorated. "Remind me where cross-training is today?" Ella said. Her ponytail jumped across her shoulders as she scanned her friends. "Kangaroo Kampground," answered Megan. It had been only 1 week since their last full-scale adventure with the secret zoo. The scouts had spent this time training as crossers, secret citizens who traveled beyond the ordinary zoo and its magical counterpart. Mr. Darby had assigned a number of secret citizens to assist in their training. A hulking man named Tank, 4 teenagers known as the Descenders, and a group of animals that included Blizzard, a powerful polar bear, Podgy, a flying penguin, P-Dog, a rambunctious prairie dog, Little Bighorn, a bold rhinoceros, and Marlowe, a kingfisher that served as a messenger bird, delivering notes between Mr. Darby and the scouts. In classroom-like settings held in various exhibits, the scouts had begun to study the wondrous world of the secret zoo. They discovered the history of the secret society, a band of humans and animals living in harmony, and learned why it existed, primarily to protect every animal species from extinction. They learned about the secret council and its principles for governing. They'd learned about the magic that had helped create the secret zoo, how it had flowed from Kavita, the world's only real magician, to eventually power her 4 sons, each born to a different mother thousands of years later. They'd learned about the straight drops, tunnels that led directly from the Clarksville Zoo to areas in the secret zoo known as sectors. These sectors resembled the zoo exhibits joined to them, only on a grander scale, and they connected to the core of the secret zoo, the city of species, which was crowded with animals and people and built in a lush forest. The scouts just cross-trained at least twice a week. Their parents believed they were serving as zoo volunteers as part of a program hosted by their school. Living next to the Clarksville Zoo made it easy. The 4 friends could walk out of their front doors, meet at the zoo, train, and be home in less than 2 hours. On school days, it was even easier. The children could swing by the zoo on their walk home, spend some time cross-training, and still beat dinner to their tables. As incredible as it seemed, it was simple for the 4 of them to maintain their normal lives while being members of a secret civilization. They could be studying math 1 hour, then riding a polar bear the next. Now they neared Kangaroo Kampground. The exhibit was in a new log building that deliberately looked old. Flat logs were stacked high, their corners interlocked. A gable roof sat on rafters that protruded beyond the outside walls. A wide boulder chimney helped frame one side of the structure. The front booth of the exhibit seemed a dilapidated shack at the world's most rustic campsite. A weather wooden sign read, "Kangaroo Kampground. Jump on in." Richie glanced at his watch. 9:30! Right on time! The front steps squealed and moaned as the scouts headed up them. The foursome stopped at the front doors, where a metal sign spoiled the rustic ambiance. Across its silvery sheen, bold black letters read, "Closed for construction." Knowing this really meant closed for cross-training, Noah dug into his pocket for the magic key that could open any door at the Clarksville Zoo and seated it into the slot. With a click, the door opened. The scouts glanced over their shoulders to make certain no one was looking and slipped inside. The exhibit was an open type where visitors could walk freely among the animals, dozens of kangaroos in this case. Trees and plants grew in the large space, and light poured in from a few big windows. Several zoo employees normally patrolled the open exhibit, but now it was empty. The scouts stepped onto the main visitor aisle, a dirt path pitted with small holes. Campsite items were all around: tents, picnic tables, barbecue grills, and fire pits with piles of fake logs that seemed to smolder. Occasional signs pretended to show the direction of campsite attractions with painted arrows: pool area, playground, showers, vending. Blinking Christmas lights dangled from the heights. Kangaroos were scattered about. Most were lounging on their sides, looking bored. A few, seeing the scouts, jumped to attention. With their powerful hind legs, rabbit-like ears, dewy-like eyes, and jumbo feet, they seemed like caricatures put together from the features of other animals. Several hopped over to the path and curiously sniffed the four friends. "Hey, dudes," Ella said as she reached out her hand, donned in a pink winter glove, and playfully tapped their heads. One kangaroo lapped its long tongue against her sleeve. The scouts turned down a path that led to the entrance of a big tent. Inside was a series of 10 aluminum benches, equally spaced. Toward the front of the tent, a television was mounted high on a pole. Normally this television looped a 10-minute video detailing kangaroo habits, but today it was turned off. Between the pole and the first row of benches stood a portable whiteboard. Beside it was a teenager with a knit cap pulled over his eyebrows and a scraggly beard dangled from his chin. It was Tameron, one of the descenders assigned to cross-train the scouts. He peered out from under the short brim of his cap. "What's up?" Noah nodded as the scouts took seats along the bench toward the middle. Tameron planted his foot on the bench in front of him. He looked like an army sergeant ready to grill a squad of soldiers who'd messed up in a serious way. "A couple days ago," Tameron began, "we had an incident." "Uh-oh," Ella said. "An incident? Already this doesn't sound good." Tank was in the grottoes, and guess what he found? Sasquatch tracks. The scouts winced. They all knew the Sasquatches had never reached as far as the grottoes. Tameron continued. "He tracked the prints into a gift shop along the east wall of the zoo." "The Knick-Knack and Snack Shack," Megan said. "That's right by Fort Scout. You can see it from our tree." Tameron nodded. "Did it get out?" Megan asked. "Didn't look like it. The tracks went straight back to the grottoes. Tank thinks it was scouting the area, looking for the easiest way to invade your neighborhood." Fear moved Noah's insides. "This is so not good," Richie said. "The east wall," Noah said. "That's the part you guys have trouble guarding at night. Because there aren't many trees, you can't post animals along it, right?" Tameron nodded. "If the Sasquatches decide to move on that part of the wall, we might not spot them until it's too late." Ella said, "So not only do we have to stop the Shadowist from getting in the zoo, now we have to stop the Sasquatches from getting out." Everyone knew the Shadowist as the near-mythical man trying to get inside the secret zoo. "Things just got more complicated," Tameron said. He seemed to consider something, then added, "What do you guys know about the patrols? The ones we do at night?" "Only what you've taught us," Ella said, "which is..." She stared into the corners of her eyes and scanned her thoughts. "Pretty much nothing." "Well, that's about to change right now." Richie greedily rubbed his hands together. "Sweetness! The perimeter patrols! I've been waiting to hear about this for weeks. Spare no detail." "I'll recap what we know," Megan volunteered. There's the concrete wall, obviously. It goes all around the zoo. It's about 15 feet high and surrounded by huge trees. You guys guard the zoo at night by somehow getting animals into those trees. The animals look out for DeGraff, the shadowist. This part always baffled me, Noah said. I mean, the animals. What kind can possibly sneak into our trees? Ella said, probably not elephants, I'm thinking. Mostly small arboreal animals, Tameron said. What, eel? Ella said. She passed a curious stare across the group of crossers and said, did we just switch languages or something? Richie jumped at the opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge. Arboreal animals. They dwell in trees. Tameron nodded. Along the perimeter wall, we post koalas, lemurs, galagos, and all kinds of possums. A few others, too. Almost all of them are nocturnal. We need them because they see good in the dark. We also use owls and bats. And prairie dogs, but they have a different role. Noah felt his jaw drop. All these animals, right there in our backyard trees? How do they not get spotted? Oh, they've been spotted, Tameron said, quite a few times. Huh? Remember about 7 years ago when 2 lemurs were spotted on Zinnia Street in a tree in some lady's backyard? The scouts nodded. Though they were too young to recall the incident, they'd heard the story. That was us. The lemurs were on watch. The lady called the police, who dispatched animal control. They trapped the lemurs and shipped them back to the zoo. Any others? Richie asked. A few, Tameron replied. People sometimes see our owls, but they don't think nothing about that. And our prairie dogs, they have always been getting spotted, but people think they're squirrels. Or gophers. Unreal, Megan said, shaking her head. There's more, Tameron said. There usually is with you guys, said Ella. The animals don't stop at the trees around the zoo wall. They go into the trees throughout your whole neighborhood. You gotta be kidding me, Megan said. We only use tarsiers for this. Tarsiers? Noah said. What are they? You're going to find out in just a little bit. Ella said, well, wherever they are, how in the world do they make it down our streets without getting noticed? Tunnels, Tameron answered. In our neighborhood? Richie said. Yep, they branch off the grottos and go everywhere. They're built and maintained by our prairie dogs. They work in them every night, cleaning out debris, widening them, extending them, burrowing new ones, and closing off old ones that are no longer needed. Way cool, said Richie. This is the kind of cool you only see in the movies. Why don't people notice holes in their yards? Ella asked. I mean, the tarsiers have to come out of somewhere. You tell me, Tameron said. It's your neighborhood. You ever see weird holes in your grass? The scouts shook their heads. The prairie dogs aren't dumb. Their tunnels rise up in private spots. Beneath bushes, sheds, decks, into open spaces beneath porches, inside dark tree hollows, all kinds of places. How many tunnels? Richie asked. If you had to guess. Tameron shrugged. Don't know. It's a big neighborhood, kid. Hundreds, I guess. Hundreds? Richie gasped. Like I said, I don't really know. Teach P-Dog to talk and maybe he'll tell you. Just then a kangaroo hopped into the tent and stopped at the back bench. He looked different from the others because one of his ears was bent sideways, as if broken. The way his short front arms dangled in front of his stomach reminded Noah of a T-Rex. He poked his snout toward the scouts and sniffled the scents out of the air, seeming a bit surprised at the gathering, his eyes wide and unblinking. Noah said, For all the time the tarsiers spend outside the zoo, 8-9 hours at night, they never get noticed? That's amazing. Your neighborhood's dark, no streetlights, and the trees are big and full. Even in the winter you can't see anything in them. All the branches blend together. And the tarsiers, they're practically... Tameron's voice trailed off. Well, you're about to see. Megan said, Do animals patrol from inside the zoo at night? Yeah, mostly in the trees and places with a good view of the grounds, the taller exhibits. We put them where there's almost zero risk of being seen. Any other animals? Richie asked. Tameron nodded. Owls and bats. Lots of bats. We use them for their echolocation. What? Ella said. Echolocomotion? It's that a song at a wedding reception? The one where everyone stumbles around in a line pretending to be a train? Echolocation, Richie said, anxious as ever to share his trivia knowledge. It's a way to tell where something is by the echo it makes. Bats use it to help them see at night, to locate prey. Yep, Tameron said, and guess what the prey is in this case? DeGraff, Noah said. The shadowist. But how can the bats tell him apart from anyone else? Remember what we told you about DeGraff, that he's part human and part shadow. His decaying body kept together by the magic in the shadows. It's kind of hard to forget a thing like that, Ella said. It's kind of a thing that hangs out in your brain, giving you nightmares and stuff. His body gives off a very distant sound. Our bats, they've been trained to pick it up. Noah thought about this. It made sense. Objects produced different echoes. Surely DeGraff's body would give off a sound like no other. Okay, Richie said. Besides the tarsiers and the other arboreal animals, we have owls and bats, and prairie dogs digging tunnels. Anything else? Monkeys, Tameron said. Police monkeys. We usually have them around 10 circling the zoo. They move in groups of 2 or 3. Richie said, always on our rooftops, right? Yeah, Tameron answered. And the trees, they try to keep off the ground. How is it possible that we don't hear them? Ella asked. We use smaller monkeys, night monkeys, spider monkeys, and others that see well at night. They don't weigh much, and they move so swiftly they hardly make a sound. The kangaroo that had entered the tent hopped up to the scouts and stopped beside Ella, who was sitting closest to the aisle. What's up, bub? Ella asked. The kangaroo tipped his head to one side and then the other, studying Ella. The end of his bent ear dangled limply. What's his name? Punchy, Tameron answered. He likes to punch things. Ella scrunched up her face and as the kangaroo and said, Don't even think about it. Not unless you're looking for a black eye. Tameron steered the conversation back, saying, The monkeys stay on the backs of the roofs, the sides that face the zoo. You can't see them from the street. And the monkeys are smart. If they see someone, they avoid all the nearby houses and move quietly through the trees. They've only been spotted once, and that was by some girl in a tree fort. Tameron raised an eyebrow at Megan, who offered a weak smile in a half-apologetic way. Can you guys think of anything else that you know about the perimeter patrols? Silence was the scout's response. Let me see if I can fill in the blanks. There are 3 main groups of secret citizens involved. Owls, other animals, and descenders. Me, Hannah, Sam, and Solana. He turned to the whiteboard and drew a large square. Okay, here's the Clarksville Zoo. Looks just like it, Ella teased as she tipped her head to one side, pretending to contemplate a drawing as one might fine art. Just like the view from a satellite, only better. Tameron circled the top line of the square and wrote the letter S. He then circled the other sides of the square and marked the circles E, N, and W. The territories, he said. Practically like my mom, like using my mom's GPS, Ella quipped. Tameron scowled at Ella. You going to be making jokes the whole time? Ella shifted her eyes nervously. I'm thinking that was probably the last one for a while. Good. Tameron turned back to the drawing and said, 4 territories. 30, maybe 40 owls assigned to each one. Each territory has a single type of owl dedicated to it. We use the smallest ones we got, pygmy owls and elf owls, which are the smallest in the world, barely the size of a sparrow. The owls perch in the highest spots in the trees, places that have good views of the neighborhood. We let them out around 10. At the same time, we release the bats. The bats aren't assigned to a specific territory. Instead, they continuously circle the zoo. Got it so far? The scouts nodded. Around 10:30, we release the animals. The ones that post in the trees along the wall just jump into them. The tarsiers move into your neighborhood through the prairie dog tunnels. Once they're out, they climb the trees and quickly settle into their posts. The scouts stopped their questions and absorbed this new information. Noah realized the wonder and mystery of the secret zoo never seemed to end. Seemed, in fact, to always be evolving into something greater, something more magnificent. Okay, Ella said, so we've now got owls and a bunch of arbora whatever real things in our trays. What about you and your buds? Tameron said, we post around the zoo. We stick to tall structures, something with a view. The water tower, Metropolis, places like that. Richie said, but the animals, what do they do if they spot DeGraff? They're trained to report the sighting back to the nearest descender. How? Asked Ella. The owls. Their purpose is to keep watch on the animals in the trees. If an arboreal animal spots DeGraff, it'll shake a branch to alert the owls. An owl will swoop in, confirm the sighting, then fly to the nearest descender, who knows to treat the owl's arrival as a message that DeGraff's been seen. The descender will contact the guards at the Clarksville Zoo using one of these. Tameron touched his ear, where a tiny ear set with visible wires was mounted. They're just sophisticated radios, he explained. The guards wear them too. Once the guards get the message, a few will team up with the descender and follow the owl to the place DeGraff was spotted. Megan asked, but that'll take some time. What if DeGraff goes somewhere else? The animals are trained to show his location by shaking branches. Tameron paused, then explained it another way. They follow him from the treetops. The scouts contemplated everything they just heard. Ideas and thoughts roamed in Noah's head, creating images. His gaze wandered. On the ground was Tameron's canvas backpack. The size of an army pack, it had bulgy pockets with zippers and buckles and snaps. Velvet patches were stitched to it. Though they seemed to be decorative, Noah understood their real purpose. They supplied the magic that enabled the thing inside the canvas bag to join to Tameron, becoming a natural extension of his body, an extremity that he could control. Coiled inside the backpack was Tameron's tail, his special power as a descender. Noah turned to Ella and saw Punchy poke out his snout forward and sniff one of her poofy earmuffs. The kangaroo softly punched it and curiously looked her over. Kangadude, Ella said. They're not my real ears, you know. To demonstrate, she pulled out one earmuff and let it snap back into place. Punchy jumped away a few feet, startled and suspicious of Ella's large pink retractable ear. He hopped behind the scouts to where Richie and took an interest in him. Richie, looking nervous, scooted down the bench. What do you want? Punchy plunged his snout into a softball-sized pom-pom on his cap, sniffed, and then sneezed all over Richie. Ew! Ella said to Richie. Kangaboogers! That's really, really gross. The kangaroo reached up his thumbless forelimb and angrily punched the pom-pom, the thing that made him sneeze. Richie grabbed his hat by the cuff and held it down. Hey! Go pick on Ella's earmuffs again. Noah, Ella, and Megan broke into a laugh. After a bit, Tameron turned back to his rudimentary drawing of the Clarksville Zoo. He drew a small square in 4 spots along the inside of the zoo, each one near a different wall. Lookout points for the descenders. 1 descender per lookout point. We rotate to stay fresh. He then shaded in areas along the zoo border saying, trees. Then on the outside of the wooden area, he drew little triangles. The houses that back to the trees. It's like Google Earth, Ella said. Look, I think I see my mailbox. Tameron touched the circles representing the territories, saying, remember, 1 type of owl is assigned to each territory. He swapped his black marker for a red one, then dropped dots in each of the circles. Their only purpose is to watch for alerts from the animals and communicate them back to the descenders. He traded a red marker for a blue one and drew a cluster of spots. The bats, dragging a dashed line around the zoo. He said, they fly around the zoo all night. He grabbed a green marker and bespeckled a triangular shape that represented a house. The police monkeys. They moved through the trees and across the rooftops. He picked up a yellow marker and drew a scattered cluster of dots all around the zoo. The prairie dogs. They're responsible for the tunnels. Then with a purple marker, he spotted the trees, the rest of the arboreal animals, tarsiers, when you get away from the wall. He drew a small square outside the eastern wall and scrawled the letters F and S inside it. Fort Scout, he said. Ah, yes, our home away from home. She squinted at the picture. Look, there's Richie playing with his electro toys. Tameron stared out at the scouts from the shadow of his brim. With his scraggly beard and his arms crossed over his chest, he looked just about like the toughest guy Noah had ever seen. He looked, in fact, like someone who might punch you in the head just for the fun of it. He turned back to the whiteboard and studied his elementary drawing, tipping his head from side to side. There's just one thing we need to change. What's that? Noah asked. We need to change this. With the palm of his hand, Tameron wiped out one of the 4 squares that represented the Descenders' lookout points. Then he picked up a black marker and drew a similar square around Fort Scout. To this. As Noah realized what Tameron was getting at, his whole body clenched. What are you trying to say? Ella asked. It was Noah who answered. He wants to move one of the lookout points to Fort Scout to keep a better watch on the east wall. The other scouts, wide-eyed with disbelief, stared at Tameron. With a smirk, Tameron said, You guys got it wrong. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's Darby doing the talking. He lifted his backpack, punched his arms through its straps, and headed for the exit of the tent, saying, Come on, let's go see the boss. The scouts hurried out into Kangaroo Kampground and followed the brawny descender toward a place in the exhibit that would magically deliver them to the secret zoo. And I'll stop the video there, ending to chapter 1. But I hope you guys enjoyed this first video of our new read-along of the secret zoo, Riddles in Danger. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and please take good care of yourselves. See you soon.